Stop the cap. Stop the cap right now. Stop the cap.
I mean, Kading says all kinds of shit that isn't true, so, you know, there's that.
Hey, look, Kading said he'd run down he absolutely ruled out ironclad cops before he went in another direction. And when I got to interview Kading, before he had any idea what I was going to do, and I put him on the spot about tons of issues, he didn't run any of them down. He's a liar, man.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Sanders had compiled a long list of the inaccuracies in murder rap by the time he contacted Kading in November 2011 to arrange a meeting at the Hilton Garden Inn in Calabasas. The attorney brought along a new associate, a young lawyer from the Bay Area named Sandra Ribera. Sanders did most of the talking when their November 3rd meeting with Kading began. My main point, obviously, was to see what it was he'd done to supposedly eliminate cops as suspects in the Biggie murder, Sanders recalled. I went through it point by point, and he hadn't run down even one of the things I asked about. Not one. So when he says the first thing he did was absolutely eliminate cops as suspects by running down every piece of supposed evidence, that's a lie. It's a blatant lie. What was most interesting to him about the entire meeting, Sanders said, was watching the way Kading changed while he was being questioned. He started out with this sort of Boy Scout persona. I'm just here to help. But as I began to ask more and more pointed questions, he literally became a different person right in front of my eyes. I've never seen a bigger Jekyll and Hyde transformation in my life. He started out innocent and charming, but believe me, that went away fast when he was put under pressure. You could see the fury in his eyes. His face was getting redder, and the atmosphere was getting more and more tense. Kading looked like he was about to pop at any second, so I took my foot off the gas and let Sandy ask some questions. Ribera, a self-described huge fan of Tupac Shakur, had become obsessed with the case after reading the 2005 Rolling Stone article while on a plane to Hawaii, shortly after her graduation from law school. I basically stalked Perry for a year until he brought me on the case, she recalled. Sanders said, I thought maybe her familiarity with the world of hip-hop would be a help, plus she was willing to work really hard for very little guaranteed money. It probably didn't hurt that Ribera's father had been the chief of police in San Francisco at the same time Bernard Parks was running the LAPD, and that the two men had been in frequent communication. Ribera, though, said she never would have asked her father to involve himself in the case. I was actually surprised that my dad never seemed upset when I got into it, she said, even though he was friends with Parks. Ribera had come into the Calabasas meeting with a far more sympathetic attitude toward Kading than Sanders had, as she recalled it, at least at the beginning. It was obvious that there was a lot he didn't know, Ribera said. The LAPD had kept a lot from him, including all of the informant interviews. He did know about Mike Robinson, and he admitted to us that Mike was credible, even though he had written exactly the opposite of that in his book. He hadn't gotten a copy of the Knox Declaration, and he wasn't given access to any of the stuff connected to Boagni. So I was thinking, this poor guy doesn't realize how the LAPD pulled the wool over his eyes. Gradually, though, it became obvious that Kading hadn't really minded having the wool pulled over his eyes. He didn't get upset or pissed off at the LAPD when Perry told him all the stuff he didn't know, but he did get pissed at Perry for pointing it all out and telling him how little he actually knew about the case. I figured, okay, now this guy has a choice. Now that he knows how much of what he's saying is bullshit, he can go back and try to make it right. But Kading didn't do anything like that. He just stuck with the bullshit. Whether it was laziness or he doesn't give a shit, I couldn't tell you. What I really think, his book was out and he didn't want to deal with any new information. But saying he ruled out cops in the Biggie murder was disingenuous at best. He knew the LAPD was happy to have him out there saying it had been proven no cops were involved. They weren't going to make an arrest or do anything that would force them to produce evidence and answer questions. They were just going to wait for it to all go away. During the interview, Kading did reveal at least one significant fact that stunned Sanders. The LAPD had shut down Operation Transparency 1 month after the dismissal of the lawsuit. The strange thing was, Sanders said, Kading seemed to know that his so-called investigation had just been used by the LAPD to protect itself from our claim of cop involvement in Biggie's murder. Ribera remembered, Kading said that Internal Affairs had refused to share any of their stuff with him and that the risk management guys had told him he couldn't have anything connected to our lawsuit. So it seemed like this totally circular situation where Kading ruled out cops being involved because the evidence indicating cops had been involved was kept from him. At one point, he more or less admitted that his job had been to come up with some theory of the case that didn't implicate police officers. And he was fine with that. When I saw that, I knew there was no hope with this guy. He could have cared less what the truth was. For Sanders, the bottom line was that Kading had rested his case-closed argument about Biggie's murder on the claims of a single, dubious witness, Tammy Hawkins. We had way more to implicate Mac and Muhammad and Perez in the Biggie murder than he had to implicate the guy he was pointing at. When I actually got in a room with Kading, I couldn't believe how thin his whole deal was. The guy was almost entirely bluff and bluster. All he had in the Biggie case was a demonstrably false theory that a 4-year-old could have beaten in court. Sanders was particularly incensed by the claim Kading was regularly making in interviews that Biggie's mom, Voletta Wallace, now supported his theory of the case. This assertion was based mostly on sections of a March 22, 2012 article written for the LA Weekly by Chris Vogel, who was now serving effectively as Kading's publicist. With the ground shifting in one of the most baffling cold cases in Los Angeles history, Voletta Wallace, while she has not ruled out dirty cops, now leans toward Kading's new evidence. Footnote: a consideration of the accusations against Greg Kading by his two most public challengers is found in Appendix B. End footnote. I believe everything in Kading's book, Vogel quoted Voletta Wallace as saying. So if Greg Kading found out all this truth, why isn't Suge Knight behind bars? What are the police waiting for? They murdered my son. LAPD, make a goddamn arrest. Vogel had completely distorted both Voletta Wallace's remarks and his own, Sanders said. Voletta and I both just in essence said, if the case is solved, as your detective says it is solved, prosecute someone. Nothing more, nothing less. No embracing Kading. That article was one more part of a disinformation campaign that has gone on for 15 years. As proof that the article was invalid, Sanders pointed to Vogel's claim that he believed the confession of Teresa Swan was solid, unimpeachable evidence. That was total BS, Sanders said. I never vouched for Swan in any way, shape, or form. Voletta Wallace said that when Kading had come to see her in Brooklyn, she had refused his offer to meet with his prize witness. I told him I would only meet with her if she was locked up, Wallace said. I told him I would believe his case was true only if the people he said were responsible had been arrested. I was never with Greg Kading or on Greg Kading's side, never. I have always believed and still believe that the one person who truly tried to solve my son's murder was Russell Poole. If I'm with anyone, it's Poole, not Kading.